Undertale Yellow is not a perfect game, not even close! But what I respect about Undertale Yellow is how it manages to capture the understated elements of Undertale. The world, the atmosphere, and some of the characters all came together to make it more than just a game I grew up from and something I can still, sort of, appreciate. And because of that, I find it admirable that the Undertale Yellow team actually had the confidence to write a world that's calm, quiet, and knows when to be serious. That's what I both enjoy and appreciate about it. When you think about it, the world of Undertale is quite depressing. An entire race of sentient creatures were trapped underground and are forced to make do with the little resources they have to the point of snow being worth $50,000. The royal family is torn apart by the deaths of their 2 kids, plunging the society into despair. Their only hope is the king killing 7 human children, absorbing their souls and becoming a god to free them from their prison. The presentation can be inconsistent, but it can still really shine, and it's a really interesting setting. And Undertale Yellow manages to capture that cold, quiet, solemn atmosphere throughout the entire game, with the only exception being the Wild East because it's centered around a bunch of dorks role-playing as cowboys. The ruins were the first part of the game developed, and while you can definitely feel that while playing, it's still entirely serviceable as an introduction. I will say, I greatly prefer how in the demo you were able to kill the first Frogget. It provided a far more satisfying jumping off point for the narrative you create with Clover. He enters the underground, looking for the lost children, and stumbles around before being ambushed by a strange monster. How would he act in that scenario? Does he attack in self-defense? Does he attack it because it's a monster? Or would he be more apprehensive and scope out the situation first? That choice loses its impact if you can't actually have an impact on the Frogget. Frisk in Undertale isn't really a character by modern standards. He's a character whose arc is defined by the decisions you make. In that way, he's similar to most 8-bit and 16-bit game protagonists. I don't think this direction for a character is inherently worse, or boring, as some people insist. It just puts the emphasis on gameplay. Clover, in comparison, is given a lot more of a character, similarly to how Chris is portrayed in Deltarune. I particularly appreciate the twist that he was the one reading out the intro dialogue this time. He has far more defined traits compared to Frisk, as shown through his dialogue options, and the fact he actively chose to enter the underground to look for the missing children. But the way he approaches that situation is defined by the route you take. Undertale Yellow using the Yellow Soul is a great choice because it immediately establishes a motivation for the main character to act how he does. Justice has many forms. It's very morally gray. One could consider the murder of someone just under specific circumstances. It's a perspective that fits and enhances both the world and mechanics of Undertale perfectly. Compare that to a soul like kindness. Why would kindness ever make the choice to murder another person? I suppose you could justify it with it being some sort of delusioned sense of kindness, such as putting someone out of their misery, but that's a far greater stretch. Perseverance would work better in that sense, since you can persevere doing literally anything. However, that lacks the moral angle that makes justice so intriguing. Even determination is less interesting for the same reason as perseverance. It is literally the same word. Why does Frisk decide to kill hundreds of monsters? Curiosity and teenage angst. Why does Clover kill hundreds of monsters? Well, he's serving justice to the race that murdered 5 children. This aspect of justice is fortunately emphasized during the course of the game, with admittedly varying quality depending on your route, but I still think it's done well overall. Toriel is given a scarf that adds some much-needed depth and color to her sprite, and in a clever twist on Undertale's first real puzzle, you're sent plummeting into the underground. I really like this. It subverts your expectations during one of the most mundane but iconic parts of the original game. It takes a previously easy puzzle and flips it on its head, turning it into the inciting incident that sends the entire plot into motion. Undertale Yellow took the far more interesting route of creating new areas and characters. When I first played the game, this was admittedly not what I was expecting. I assumed Clover would be fighting Undyne at some point and shoot out her eye. But I understand not wanting to try and write a canon-esque backstory for every single Undertale character in your fan game. That would lead to a lot of, this character wouldn't act that way, and also just ask the question of why you're bothering to make a new game and setting in the first place. I've experienced enough alphies for a lifetime. You would not be capturing the spirit of Undertale if you did not have a cast of schizophrenic new characters to get invested in. This does not mean every area is completely original though. You still visit the ruins, Snowdin, and Hotland, you just end up exploring the deeper parts of them. It really helps emphasize the whole cave story thing. And when you do finally make it back somewhere recognizable, it's like, aw shit, things are getting real now. A parallel can be drawn between the main cast of Undertale Yellow and the original cast of Undertale as well. Except for Alphys. No one likes Alphys. Undertale was purposefully left vague and empty to encourage coming up with your own answers, occasionally to a downright insulting degree. But Undertale Yellow actually makes that world. If you've ever wanted to explore New Home or the scenery in Snowdin, well, here you go! And dare I say, it's executed very well. Wow. That is a really good animation of paper. Flowey offers a unique sense of companionship I haven't seen done in another game, acting as a distant observer, offering his commentary at his save points, commenting on how many times you've saved, telling you to stop saving so much, and having some new things to say when returning to old save points. Despite presuming he'd eventually betray you, he keeps up the persona long enough that it's actually sort of surprising when he starts getting pushy, and eventually pulls the trigger by killing Martlet. It's all charming. He gets a lot of subtle and unsubtle characterization that doesn't feel out of place. He's given a lot to work off of thanks to Clover and all the new areas he explores, and it works to make his dialogue generally more compelling, and funny. In comparison, Undertale jammed all of his best character moments and backstory into a long spiel at the end of the genocide route. I really like that spiel, but outside of that, and some secret dialogue when refighting Asgore, his character comes off as very shallow and desperate to be scary. Undertale Yellow, in comparison, gives him a lot more time to set up and pay off, with his dialogue at the end of the genocide route once again being a standout moment where his facade finally breaks and he starts viscerally berating you, creating an amazing contrast between Frisk, who he believes is Chara, and Clover, whom he really fucking hates. The Dark Ruins are fine enough, being the ruins, but well, actually visibly ruined. Despite not being the most original location in the game, I could still easily map it out by memory, because each room has a unique set piece to separate them from each other. In fact, I just did. I'm not going to check how accurate it is because I know I'm right about everything. This is incredibly important when designing a world that's meant to be memorable and truly feel lived in. There's an unattended lemonade stand, a corn maze, the one light puzzle that's in every single game, and the dark caves you go through before encountering Dalv. None of it is exactly groundbreaking, but it works to keep every room distinct. Despite liking Hollow Knight, that game is an example of failing at this. Every single location in that game is a blur. The City of Tears is a gorgeous area that I remember incredibly fondly, but I could not tell you where a single one of these screenshots is actually located. I'm not going to go over every single monster design, except for Fly Guy, which was probably the first monster they designed, when they were 14. Most of them try to look cute and appealing, which is an issue shared with Undertale. It turns out, trying to paint a world where humans are opposed to monsters and lock them all underground is kind of hard to believe when those monsters look like this. And this. And this. The subversive quality of the game is ruined when the enemies you're supposed to be mindlessly attacking on a first playthrough don't even look like real threatening enemies. If you want a better example of how it should have been handled, look at Luke's, a character that's far more nuanced in its design. A creepy smile with sharp teeth contrasted by a round, unimposing body. Like I said, this is an Undertale issue though. I can't blame Undertale Yellow for making monsters look cute and appealing for the internet when it's just what Undertale did. The mirror enemy specifically stands out because he shatters when he's at low health. Every monster in Undertale Yellow was given a unique sprite when at low HP, and it greatly helps emphasize that these creatures are meant to be living beings and not just sprites. This is something Undertale didn't even do, and it's a great detail that didn't have to be included, but it greatly helps emphasize that your choices do matter. The mini-boss of this area is pretty unique, and the way his battle starts is very charming, with the screen fading out and his eyes appearing out of the dark. The way it introduces the colored attacks by contextualizing it through sound doesn't make any sense logically, but it took me 3 years to think about that, so it works really well. It being contextualized at all isn't something you'd really consider as it just feels normal, but it is really worthy of praise. Noibat's also incredibly easy, probably even easier than Napstablook. The game could have started out a lot more difficult, after all everyone playing the game has already beaten Undertale, however something tells me they probably made the right choice. Fitting for a boss designed around sound, this is when the music goes from alright to mind-blowingly good. Not to disrespect every song that came before it, but Fever Pitch beats most of Undertale's best songs, and it's for the first mini-boss. I especially like the segment in his boss theme with the drums. It reminds me of Color Splash. If there's a term for it, I don't know it. But unfortunately, the act of playing the game makes the song quieter. Delve is pretty much forgotten about as soon as you leave the ruins, and isn't given much of a focus during the ending. Admittedly, he does come off as rather simple and unsubtle at first, but when you read his diary and learn he was part of Integrity's massacre, it starts coming together. He's inoffensive, somewhat humorous when you hang out with him at his house, and he gives you a sponge cake, literally. Truly the unsung hero of this narrative. Him opening the boarded up door out of the ruins for you is an understated touch that honestly does a lot to make his character more likable and actually impactful. You could have just walked out like in Undertale, but no, he puts in some work to emphasize your bond. It's a nice touch that also helps make everything feel like more than just a tile set. The same applies to Flowey during the neutral route when he breaks it with friendliness pellets. Delve's boss fight is tolerable. Graphically, it's quite nice. I'm a huge fan of the visual flourishes added for the full release. The music is also a fantastic use of a leitmotif. Leitmotifs should be clever. They shouldn't just be the song again. That's lazy, boring, and insulting to the player's intelligence. Like, hey, it's the song again. Do you get it? They should still sound different and fresh while still sharing that same melody in a way that's contextually appropriate and fun to realize. Like Arc 2 in Klonoa Lunatail's Veil. Here it's a theme shared with the bat without sounding too derivative or similar. It's also appropriate that it's shared because he's a vampire and it's a bat. I know, very subtle. It's very important for the first boss to test you on the game's core mechanics, and Delve achieves that perfectly, because Delve's fight establishes a lot of the issues with the telegraphs in this game, or lack thereof. A lot of his attacks aren't particularly hard, but just require memorization to know how to respond. Most of his attacks don't give you much reaction time and just expect you to figure it out. Fast. It's nowhere near as bad as it can get, but it's not great either. And that was the end of the demo. It was all we really had for 7 to 8 years. Actually, you get a corn dog. That's pretty funny. Pun-based food items were an entertaining part of Undertale. Every item in the game also has unique dialogue when eating it in battle, which is an extra layer of charm and soul. Many people, even the developers, view Snowdin as merely a build-up to the real game, that being the desert with Starlow and Soroba. But for me, from a narrative perspective, this was the greatest part of the entire game. The song here is a beautiful twist on the Snowdin theme that manages to capture the sad nostalgia of revisiting a place you once knew. It starts out with a more inconsistent, unstable melody as you're stumbling out of the ruins before slowly adjusting into a more steady tune as you trek on. The reverb works to exemplify how vast and empty the woods are, and sweet sentimentality for a world so different yet familiar. The strong chords in the background invoking powerful emotion, left over from Master Sword's tendency to only write epic boss music. All of these traits work to make the slowed down version during the genocide route sound better than usual. It might honestly be one of my favorite songs of all time, right next to the City of Tears and every song in Spirit Tracks. This is the best part of the game for me, and thankfully it was never ruined. It proved to me that the team behind the game understood the lasting appeal of Undertale, how to build off of the original and utilize the player's memories and nostalgia for it. For people like me, who grew up with Undertale and wanted to revisit it in a fresh way that grew up alongside them. Not in a safe way either. They took a lot of risks with the new areas and characters. In comparison, Snowy from Undertale sounds more like a calm, mysterious stroll through a snowy forest, with its light taps on the piano, which fits the more relaxed, lighthearted tone of Papyrus's shenanigans. But Undertale Yellow takes place far beforehand, with your fate already decided. You're experiencing the simpler past of a world you're already intimately familiar with. There's a lot of gravitas to the situation. I greatly prefer Undertale Yellow's rendition of the theme, but to be fair, that's because Undertale set it up. The moral of this being that music can carry a video game. The puzzles in Snowdin are fine. Generally, the puzzles in the game are fine. They tend to edge on the easier side, even compared to Undertale, which is disappointing. But they tend to introduce more unique mechanics such as measuring liquid, connecting railroad tracks, or collecting the right chemicals to keep them from getting stale. They're also far better contextualized for each area. Instead of block moving and shooting puzzles for whatever reason in Hotland, or a random piano in a wet cave, you're instead manipulating coolant levels, moving ore in minecarts, and engineering acid. In Snowdin, much like Undertale, the puzzles are constructed by a character arguably on the high end of the autism spectrum. Martlet is the quirky antagonist of Snowdin who sucks at everything, but she has a clear, defining trait that completely separates her from Papyrus. She's cute. Not in the bodacious furry babe kind of way. I'm no virgin. I mean she's cute in the endearing way. Though considering when this game started development, I would not be surprised if that was actually the intention. I know there are many based Martlet critics out there who would love nothing more than the killer to death, but I, sadly, am not one of them. Her design was made in 2016 before they wrote her to be a tinkerer, which, oops, probably should have fixed that. It explains why it hardly comes up again after Snowden. It's strange because they do a really good job making you experience her love for carpentry firsthand during Snowden, and then it just never comes back up. This might also explain why her sprites look incredibly rough compared to the rest of the main cast. The shading is excessive, her wings are overly detailed, and she talks by shifting her head up and down a pixel. Her wings are way too thin, resulting in her flying animation looking awkward, and her shirt being the same color as her body is a really strange design choice. I have no clue why they didn't just make it white.
Looks like you need some help.
Whoa! I'm white!
However, in the current game, her face sprites are very well drawn. They're incredibly expressive, despite not being over-exaggerated like Birdley's. I don't believe one is inherently better than the other, but it certainly conveys a different direction. Her name stems from a mythical bird without legs that never roosts, implying she'd be incredibly hard-working, tirelessly committing herself to her job. Except a main trait of her that's pretty directly stated during her genocide flashback is that she's lazy and became a royal guard specifically so she'd be able to build things, but also get paid to lie around all day. Because of this seemingly contradictory information, I have been stumped on this section for hours. Due to her being part of the Royal Guard, she accompanies you a couple times throughout the game. It's also clear she has some personal investment as well. However, her appearances are far more dramatic and exciting during the genocide route where she has personal stakes with Clover, having directly fought him in Snowden and forcing her to retreat. Those moments were some of my favorite parts of the genocide run. She's fine. I wouldn't say she's better than Papyrus, but it's because she fills a different role as a sort of inconsistent and incompetent mother figure to Clover. When viewed from that perspective, it makes sense why she accompanies you so much and is the one to judge your actions at the end of the game. Really, her character is just very well suited for Undertale Yellow in general. If Papyrus and his quirky shenanigans were transplanted into Undertale Yellow's Snowden, there would be a lot of intense tonal whiplash, but Martlet is relatively calm. Her dialogue is also generally charming, highlights being when she recognizes you as a human from your hat, asks you to review her performance, and her face and body melt. But she does lack the abrasive spark that made Papyrus more generally entertaining. We missed out on a crazy genocide sprite. I really like it and how it would have separated the genocide route from Undertale's tonally and emphasizes the effects of the serum, but it does lack the Royal Guard motif, so I understand why it was scrapped. I also quite like the Japanese-inspired one with the long flowing wings. It would have helped Soroba look less out of place, but it also doesn't make any sense. If the game ever gets an anniversary update to fix some things, which it won't, I think refining Martlet's design and overworld sprites would be a greatly appreciated touch. Especially during the Alphys flashback, which looks hilarious. The solution for that should be respriting Hotland and Alphys to look better, not making Martlet look worse. Although, that would be pretty funny. Snowden is also where you get one of the coolest weapons in the game, ice bullets. One of the most important parts of a game for me is its sense of progression. The sense of feeling clever and skilled by achieving things yourself. It's why I'm such a big fan of Wind Waker, Earthbound, and Pikmin, because every achievement you make in those games is purely your own. There's something inherently satisfying about having a scrappy protagonist that makes do with what they have to reach feats beyond what anyone could imagine. When you get the grappling hook or boomerang in Wind Waker, it's not an incredibly cool, technologically advanced item that only you can have and lets you move everything or travel through ceilings. It's a simple item, but you squeeze so much utility out of it. It makes you feel like you're the one actually making progress and not some guy being railroaded by a bunch of people and objective markers to reach a goal you were designed to achieve. It builds far more character. And I can't stand how modern games are so hell-bent on removing that. Take this mount that runs around faster for you. Take this specific item for free that only you can have because you're the chosen one, and it'll solve all of your problems for you. Do this specifically stated objective with a marker permanently stuck to your screen like a tumor that tells you exactly where to go and what to do. It's why I have a specific vendetta against mounts in games, because they detract from the feeling of actually doing something yourself. This isn't about linearity. After all, I hate games like Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom like they killed my family. It's rather about how the progression and story is presented. The King of Red Lions and Wind Waker told you where to go early in the game, but it wasn't overly patronizing or specific. You still do all of the work, navigation, and decision making yourself. Now, how does this relate to Undertale Yellow? Well, our crafty little protagonist here is using sharp shards of ice as bullets, and they pack quite a punch. That's cool. It adds so much personality that wouldn't exist if you just found a better gun in a chest or something. Icicles are also just a really beautiful part of nature. Almost every bullet or weapon in this game is done in this way, and it makes getting new weapons actually surprising and memorable. You use pebbles, icicles, coffee beans, shards of glass, and nails. Wow, that's horrifying. But sparingly, you can buy or are given new ammunition, and when that happens, it actually feels special. Specifically when Flowey gives you friendliness pellets for your gun, which is both a great way of cementing your companionship with him, and also just really satisfying, because in Undertale you experience how powerful they are firsthand. The unique round designs and sound effects also add a lot to differentiate them, and add to the excitement of finding them. They all have very abstract and sharp animations, seemingly inspired by Earthbound, that give each shot a real sense of impact. While Undertale Yellow doesn't have TS Underswap's absolutely exquisite variety in action commands, the main attack in Undertale Yellow is still pretty good. It's very quick, almost 2 times as fast as Undertale's. That's important when designing something you'll be doing over 100 times in a single playthrough. It's also far more diegetic. Instead of it just being a bar with random dots that people are still trying to look for the meaning of, it's a target, and you have to stop the reticle at the bullseye. Did you know Undertale's action commands don't actually touch the center of the box when you land a critical hit? They just teleport to the center when you're close enough. Undertale Yellow fixes this issue by making attack timings for all ammunition consistent. When your revolver is upgraded by Starlo, the action command is also upgraded to happen 6 times while gradually ramping up in speed. It unfortunately trades the brevity of the original, but it more than makes up for it in complexity. The difficulty of your main action command ramps up with the rest of the game. It is, dare I say, genius. Visually, it's also presented very well with the round rotating. You encounter Mo, a repeating gag character with a catchy theme song using the Genesis sound font. His cleverly written salesman tactics and expressive animations give us a glimpse into an alternate reality where Spamton wasn't milked into the ground by Toby Fox for 4 years. He's also literally just a furry. One of the first things I noticed about Undertale Yellow was how, compared to Undertale, a lot of the main cast were just furries. It's a really bad decision because it brings the human and monster war into question. Fear and animosity towards a group of dangerous-looking creatures that can absorb your soul is natural. But when those creatures are a naive bird girl in fluffy boots and a Japanese, somehow, fox girl, it starts getting questionable. But after thinking about it a bit more, that applies to Undertale as well. In Undertale, all of the shopkeepers are literally just furries, and a good chunk of the NPCs are rabbit people, cat people, and dog people. In Deltarune, it's even worse, with the entirety of the main cast just being Tumblr personas, including a dinosaur, a goth cat, a doe I'm no longer allowed in 50 feet of, and a blue bird. I'd say Toby should have stuck with them being human characters, but his track record with their designs isn't exactly flawless. So it's certainly something to critique Undertale Yellow about, but it's an issue that can be levied towards base Undertale as well. Not to nearly the same extent, as Undertale did have a balding freak and a pair of skeleton brothers, but it also had a nerdy bisexual dinosaur and 3 goat people. Their unique traits as these creatures are at least utilized outside of just the set dressing, which is worthy of praise. The bird can fly, and the fox can Japanese. The fetch quest involving getting a rabbit's tongue unstuck from a pole was a surprising example of a typically annoying fetch quest done well. You can't use the coffee you just bought because it's too hot. You have to make it lukewarm coffee by handing it to a guy who doesn't even end up drinking it. It's nothing incredible, but it helps squeeze more out of the area. Normally fetch quests like these are fucking agonizing, and they've only gotten worse as long loading times and excessively large open worlds have become normalized. But this is restricted to a single, linear, highly condensed area with memorable set pieces and uniquely designed characters, so it doesn't suffer from any of the flaws that usually make this a form of cruel and unusual punishment, and I think that's pretty nifty. I have heard some people complain about it though, and I have to ask, how many RPGs have you actually played? It also helps create the illusion that these 2-frame sprite animations have thoughts of their own. The reveal that the rabbit was actually incredibly sophisticated and articulate was an example of a dumb joke handled well. I know I'm not alone in this sentiment because I've heard it spread around. Modern technology in games is distracting and immersion breaking. I hate whenever it shows up. Seeing a character pull out a smartphone in a game makes me want to blow my fucking brains out. Having a smartphone isn't cool or relatable. It's just a crushing reminder that everything we're experiencing is fiction, and the inevitable march of progress beyond the realm of our screens is heading towards a cold and foreseeable demise. Undertale Yellow doesn't have this problem. Because it takes place in the past, you don't have a smartphone or anime. You get mail delivered to you by a mail whale, and it's adorable. It's also infinitely better from a gameplay standpoint. It's far more natural and intuitive to come across a UGPS station on your path and check it than it is to remember to check your menu and call a specific monster. There's so much more personality in this kind of system because characters aren't just talking to you, they're writing. It leads to a bunch of unique interactions that could only exist in that kind of medium. Some of them write differently or add little details that aren't possible in normal dialogue. It's a massive improvement from Undertale's system, and the delivery whale rhymes. Absolute perfection. The talk system completely ignores all of that though. When a character follows you around, you're given the option to talk to them inside of the menu. It sucks. A lot of important information that helps flesh out their characters is hidden behind this system, and I didn't even remember it existed on my first playthrough. I respect not wanting to interrupt the player with dialogue and therefore hiding it in a menu, but at that point I have to question why it exists at all. How about instead, you have a little exclamation mark appear over their heads when they have something to say, and make it so pressing a button starts a conversation with them. The shufflers are admittedly the most forgettable part of Snowdin, and I would not mind if they never existed. It's one of the few times the pacing is unnecessarily halted for no reason. The puzzles in most areas, at the very least, serve as a form of world building, like in the mines, or as a method of character development, like Martlet's puzzles. I can't say that about the shufflers, though. Once you finish their puzzle, they send you a letter, but that's the extent of it. Returning to them shows that nothing has really changed. If they served more of a purpose in Snowdin after you battled them, then I could say they served a purpose, but they never come up again. Though the bit where you try and enter a battle with them is a competent bit of meta humor. The shuffling puzzle is also too slow and easy, mainly because they only move horizontally and not in a circular motion, meaning only one of them can move at a time, or else it becomes literally impossible. They aren't insufferably written, but whenever I encounter them, I just want to get the segment over with as fast as possible. At what is near the end of Snowdin, there's a warm yellow cabin that contrasts against the cold blue outdoors. The melody in the background is simple, cozy, and inviting. It truly feels like you've made it to a respite after a long journey, finally surrounded by the warmth of other people. The execution is successful, since interactions with NPCs were far more sparse beforehand, and Martlet hasn't directly interacted with Clover yet. To the left is a campfire with some good new-fashioned Earthbound-inspired writing, and now would be a good time to talk about how great the dialogue in this game is. What Earthbound is given the most praise for is its incredible writing, specifically its NPC dialogue. Unlike other games of the era, or even to this day, it was always stylized. NPC personalities weren't just the joke, the tutorial, the quest giver, or the hint giver. They achieved all of those things while still coming off as real people with their own lives, thoughts, and interests, while still being funny without acting over-exaggerated or cartoonish. This is what it truly means to be Earthbound-inspired, to have well-written dialogue that's both heavily comedic while still being natural and immersive. After all, the main appeal of Earthbound was that it was an RPG that took place in modern-day America, just with some science fiction. You used bats, frying pans, and bottle rockets to beat up dogs and snakes. That would be ruined if these NPCs all acted like a bunch of unrealistic caricatures. Some of my favorite examples in Earthbound are the lady who gives you a map, the guy who suggests they should make pretty girl paper, and the man who gets his wife back for painting his house blue, just to exclaim how happy he is that she left him again. This was something Undertale had executed fine for the most part. This is something Undertale Yellow executes quite well. NPCs don't just exist to be the joke. They serve a purpose in making the world feel lived in, like it can and will continue on without you. When NPCs only exist to deliver a joke and nothing else, it conveys the exact opposite, that the world isn't real and it's specifically designed and exists for you. Making a world where the atmosphere is lead doesn't constitute funny or clever writing, it shows a fundamental misunderstanding of what made Earthbound's writing work. Outside of one short annoying exception, a more debatable moment, and some joke sketches made during development, modern lingo or memes are never referenced, and I am eternally grateful for that. This game did not take the easy, lazy way out. It wrote dialogue that was not only funny, but is contextually appropriate and heightens your immersion in the world instead of destroying it. Seriously, imagine an alternate universe where Starlo made an Among Us reference. This game would become the laughingstock of the entire internet, but luckily, no game would ever stoop to that level of humor. To the left is a hot spring with a scenic view. The overuse of pixel art as a method of putting in minimal effort when developing indie games may have turned it into a form of psychological torture. But sometimes, very rarely, it can still look good for what it's worth, and Undertale Yellow is a prime example of that. Undertale Yellow's pixel art is consistently better than both Undertale and Deltarune's. Animations are fluid, and even a niche scenario like a character turning their head is fully animated. Areas also have unique set pieces that aren't constructed from tile sets, like big trees and houses. It all looks very pretty by pixel art standards, especially considering it's a free fan game. It can lead to a lot of jarring shifts when returning to Undertale's classic MS Paint art style though. Behind the cabin, there is a secret spring with a golden coffee mug that unlocks a secret boss. I've never done it and don't really plan to. It just looks kind of stupid, and I'm so good at video games that I don't need the armor. Fortunately, the ending reveals the boss was just the protag having a seizure on the floor from the lead paint they were coated in, so it doesn't completely obliterate the internal cohesiveness of the world. There's a pink anthropomorphic bear girl manning the shop, but there's a normal bear outside. Is that like the furry equivalent of being born retarded? The shops in Undertale Yellow feature a lot more animation compared to Undertale's more restrained graphics, such as the bear girl flopping onto the counter, or the old man accidentally firing off into the rafters. A weird thing about the shops in this game though is that during the genocide run, items don't actually restock. I'm very mixed on this choice. On one hand, it encourages actually learning bosses, as you can't just mindlessly tank through them with your healing items without being heavily punished later on. But with how questionably designed some of the fights can get, it feels a bit too punishing. Even if the bosses were perfectly designed, it's not conveyed to the player all that well. There's nothing signifying that items are of a limited stock, and what you're receiving is actually one of the best healing items in the game. So I'm pretty mixed on it. Game mechanics aside, I really love the writing here, and for all of the other shops in the game as well. It does a great job capturing the same niche as Valhalla, also known as good writing. None of it is overbearing or forced onto you. It's just some fun history that proves the characters and world had a lot of thought behind them. The items, as to be expected, are uniquely stylized to the location as well. Our unique blend of hazelnut creamer and honey. I tried it, and it gave me a headache, but it was quite good. Admittedly, the composer cameos are a bit on the nose and forced, but the monster designs fit in well enough that it isn't overly distracting. And Toby did the same thing! And I mean, if I spent 8 years on a fan game, I'd want to self-insert myself too. The cabin was thought out to be as functional as possible, seating with cushions, a bar with stools, and a heat lamp for people to sit next to. There's a lot of care put into designing this area, a lot of care that I've hopefully conveyed my respect for over the past few minutes. They could have cheaped out and just made it fade to black and immediately go into the shop, but they did not. It's one of the many reasons I really like this game, in spite of its flaws. There's a bridge segment here that's kind of weird. I get the idea behind it, but the timing isn't quite right. Because it's a 2D sprite animation, it doesn't work how you'd assume it would. You have to start walking onto it before it actually becomes flat with the bridge. Not a good puzzle for a 2D game, but I appreciate the effort. It would suck if an entire game was built around that kind of design though. In contrast to Dalve, the bullet patterns for this fight are actually really good. They're well telegraphed and do a great job presenting her interests. Some of them animate Martlet too, something Undertale only did on very rare occasions, like the inflation dragon. Remember that? That was funny. It is a unique predicament, as Martlet is woefully inexperienced in combat to the point of not even knowing how painful it is. She follows Royal Guard protocol this whole time, while you either ignore her or tell her to shut up. It's sort of reminiscent of Papyrus, but not quite derivative, because strangely he actually knew what he was doing. The music here is really, really great, but she points it out in the text box, which feels too self-indulgent. During the genocide run, though, Martlet's genocide boss fight, unlike the rest of the genocide boss fights, is actually really good. Dare I say it's the best fight in the whole game. Attacks are well telegraphed and fair, while also being reasonably more challenging. The rendition of Protocol, while fine, is a bit hard to take seriously due to it falling into the cliche of using metal guitars for the genocide route. The retching is one of the weirder samples I've heard, but it works shockingly well. The dialogue is absolutely delightful though, especially if you choose to abort the genocide route here. The track used here not feeling too try-hard, and leaning more into the desolate atmosphere. It's a perfect, dare I say better version of Papyrus's genocide cutscene. In that route, he comes off as a bit too stupid and not just like a man with a big heart. It's still a moment that really stresses your willpower, but it should have toned back his ego similar to the bridge segment before it. In comparison, Martlet thinks you're a straggler and assumes you're only attacking out of fear, before a very satisfying revelation that it's all been your fault, even though you're just a kid. It's all written very well. Young teenage me gives it a 10 out of 10. Undertale Yellow is on par with, if not surpasses Undertale in this regard. It's so morbidly fascinating. It's a messed up power fantasy that typically goes unrecognized in games. Undertale's emphasis on actual player choice gives it a weight it deserves, and the way the world reacts to it is riveting and realistic. Tragedy forms unlikely alliances, it makes people change for better and worse, and you're at the forefront of it all, stomping on microfroggets. It's why it's my second favorite route in Undertale and Undertale Yellow, right behind the moral ambiguity and melancholy of the neutral route that I'm a total sucker for. There's an oversight during this boss where if you swap your ammunition, you can avoid Martlet's escape condition and kill her, which is actually incredibly cool. It feels like an intentional secret that rewards you for thinking outside the box. Until the game crashes. Snowdin is not a particularly long segment. It doesn't have the most area variety or even the best puzzles, but the world building and music is so great I don't care. I also really like snow. That's probably a part of it. It's a beautiful aesthetic that you almost never see fully realized in games. While visually it isn't the most impressive, although the walls of pine trees stand out as particularly well done, drawing good foliage is a pain. It masters the substance, an old broken wood cabin, frozen trees, warm fires, benches, hot springs, big rocks, wooden bridges, airheaded unicorn girls, and icy rivers. You know, typical stuff. Though I don't like this place as much as Snowdin for biased reasons. There's more visual variety, more overworld puzzles, and more characters. Progression is constant, never stopping unless you take a detour to see Mo. It feels far more like an actual adventure fitting the Wild West setting and adventurous music. It lasts the perfect amount of time, not too long, not too short, and it ends with a unique mini-boss. But there aren't any unicorns with dementia, so I'm going to have to give it 2 Fennekins out of 10. You dodge sandstorms and tumbleweeds, talk to some fun characters, learn about the mining operation and stones. There's some foreshadowing for the Feisty Five here. They're the ones who bought the giant fan and boulder droppers. You'd think with that kind of money, they'd be able to buy an actual train. They could have just kept it to the owners of Mining Co. talking about their daughter role-playing, as it's far funnier anyway. But the obstacles they result in are worth keeping them around. Perhaps it would have been better if they were built by Chujin to establish him as a character earlier, similarly to what the Honeydew Resort did. But I'm also not sure why he'd build the little Cowboy Crusher 9000, so never mind. There's a very unique puzzle here that was discussed in the art book. It's a puzzle with multiple solutions. You can do a quiz that tests your knowledge for a pickaxe, or buy one for 40 gold. Or use the matches from the previous area if you didn't finish the long fetch quest. It is indeed very memorable, because I fucked up the last question, forgetting Asgore had only 5 souls during the game. The capstone of this area is Danza. I like him, but as a sophisticated and cultured sentinel of silence, I need this nigga dead. Undertale Yellow actually integrates the rhythm game into the battle system in a way that feels natural, with 3 whole buttons to boot. Wow! The gameplay I come to this game for, with a twist to keep it fresh! During the genocide route, you get to see a more self-aware side to him, where he acknowledges dancing isn't for everyone and apologizes for wasting your time, showing he's not completely daft. It makes sure he isn't just a shiny cardboard cutout, but rather a man whose passion gets the better of him, turning him into a far more redeemable and relatable character. I do not hate it when he shows up, which is a good sign for a gimmick battle. I also enjoy how in Undertale Yellow, you still get the unique soul gimmicks Undertale had, despite not changing your soul color. This town is very forgettable, and the only thing that gives it a semblance of identity is Martlet joining you for the duration of it. Oh, and the amateur fortune teller that foreshadows your death, which was already foreshadowed by Undertale. It's pretty fun though. The only real unique feature it has is an arcade machine with a Mew Mew Kissy Cutie video game, which I hate and never want to play again. It doesn't help that it's visually very repetitive, just being a bunch of sand houses, though there are some clever splashes of color around the place. You can't even actually shop in the shop because the owner is striking against herself. You can steal from it during the genocide route though, which is a neat detail. It's sorta funny, but it results in the town lacking any substance outside of Soroba's mansion, which you can only access during the end of the game. It's probably why the Wild East has 2 whole unique shops in a card game. You get 2 cameos from Undertale Red and Green, which I do not care about. It distracts from the game's identity that it's desperately trying to carve for itself. It's a nice sentiment, but I don't care about sentiment. I sold my soul to Chara a dozen times when I was 14. The writing in this segment is easily the highlight, a necessity due to it mostly being writing. I'm a simple man. I see Starlo ask to buy a gun for a child and I laugh. There is a reference to a relatively modern meme here, but it's actually a thought experiment from the 1900s, so it's theoretically possible and thematically appropriate while being analogous to Starlo's character arc. With Starlo seizing control of a train and relentlessly driving through the Wild East, crushing Saroba and the Feisty Five with thousands of pounds of unforgiving steel! The only real issue with this section is that all of the characters are just thrown onto you all at once, and it clutters up the overarching narrative with Saroba and her family. There's North Star, whose real name is Starlo, Saroba Ketsukane, whose dead daughter is Kaneko and dead husband is Chujin, Ed, the big red guy, Moray, the fish lady, Ace, the card guy, very clever, and Mooch, who's literally just a furry. That's 6 monsters and 2 dead monsters, all mainly introduced in one area. Because of this, when Saroba was talking about her husband and dead child, I didn't know who she was talking about. It took until Hotland for it to all come together. Though maybe the intention was that you're supposed to be completely out of the loop, and just some random kid forced to piece together someone's personal drama. Like hearing your friend's parents argue when you're just trying to play Smash Brothers. Because of how heavy this section is on character interactions and cutscenes, it's easily the most unreplayable part of the game, but there really isn't a fix for that, unfortunately. Though if there was more gameplay involved, similarly to the Feisty 5 boss battle, that could have helped. Speaking of which, is an incredible boss battle. Great attack variety, visual flourishes, and the way they all combine their attacks is incredibly unique. Deal 'Em Out being an absolutely incredible song that's stylistically distinct from the rest of the game. This area is fun. I understand why the developers feel like it's when the game started shaping its own identity. Or I mean, became confident in themselves as developers. In another example of the game's surprisingly good-looking pixel art, the buildings have strong perspective to them. Neat. As mentioned earlier, there are 2 shops here, both of which have a bit of a joke to them. The old man has an in-depth backstory and accidentally fires his gun off while spinning it. The snake lady refuses to sell you alcohol, unless it's the genocide route, then no one can stop you.
How do I look, yellow man?
You look like you're about to tell your friend not to come to school tomorrow, man.
Starlo is easily the best, most developed character in the game, with an actual character arc. He gets lost in the excitement of a human visiting, and he starts disregarding his old posse because of it. It's really well executed, and the way he lashes out at everyone for what feels like a betrayal is realistic. He's a great character, his struggles are relatable, and throughout all of it he stays entertaining, lovable, and sympathetic. He's not just some misunderstood nice guy. He inadvertently acted selfish, he did some bad things, and it resulted in him pushing away his friends. But his motives are always understandable, and he quickly redeems himself, taking off his hat and revealing the nerdy farm boy he's embarrassed of being, in an absolutely incredible part of his character design. But there was always a selfless part to his act, trying to distract Saroba from the death of Kaneko. Now that's a great fucking character. And if you kill him, it's heartbreaking when he says, "Let my parents know I'll be away for a while." If Papyrus is the test of your resolve in the genocide route of Undertale, Starlo is the test of your resolve in Undertale Yellow. Is what I'd say if Clover didn't automatically shoot him. Oh well. His facial expressions are great, and when he lashes out at Saroba for her hypocrisy at the end of the pacifist route, his anger feels earned. His dialogue is absolutely hilarious, perfectly translating the dialect of a cowboy to text, with his absurd interpretations of humankind based on old Western flicks. It's similar to how Undyne's knowledge on humans comes solely from anime, except less terrible. He wasn't putting on a fake accent either, he's actually just a farmer. That's the biggest twist in the game. His white eyes beneath his hat actually being glasses is both one of the most clever design choices I've ever seen and absolutely adorable. The picture of him and Saroba is also just so damn cute. Just let my nigga smash that fox box already, he's earned it. His boss fight has a great gimmick, being tied up in a lasso and being tied to the center of the bullet board. forcing you to alter your movement and the way you perceive attacks. And it probably has the best theme in the game, an incredible mix of chiptune with a classic western motif, with bullet patterns themed around bombs, guns, horseshoes, and trains. He doesn't let up either, it's pretty difficult at level 1. But he doesn't have a fucking genocide boss battle because Soroba takes it from him like the greedy bitch she is. The repeated unspoken gag of him misspelling duel during the boss fight is also really funny. It's a smart joke, it's inherently funnier. The Steamworks is a far more densely packed Hotlands, with music that rivals another medium, more unique puzzles, and a completely unique path for the neutral route. Also, you aren't interrupted by text messages every couple of seconds. Meltdown is a good song, with the synths and wavering guitar combined with a piano that sounds like droplets of the pink lemonade, or whatever that stuff is. It's an unusual but fitting mixture of instruments. It's overpowering, a bit too overpowering, something the team was probably aware of, as it surprisingly doesn't get used that much. But damn if it doesn't sound good. It has a strong sense of finality and emotion. Yes, probably because it's the final area. The layout of this place is not nearly as memorable as the previous 3. There are a couple repeated gimmicks in similar looking areas, but considering how there are 2 different routes you can take here, that's pretty justified. The developers even felt the need to implement a shortcut partway through. Unlike Undertale, the pacifist route isn't just an extension of the neutral route. It branches off into separate areas, starting with the Steamworks. During the neutral route, you interact with Flowey a lot more in order to build up to the moment he kills Martlet. And in the pacifist route, you journey with Soroba instead to help flesh out her story before her boss fight. He uses the separation between pacifist and neutral well to help develop the character that's more important. You also either draw your own ID for the Steamworks or build a robot for Arceus. Drawing your ID isn't as creative as building a robot, but it's the far more entertaining out of the two just because it's less limiting. It's a bit of player expression. It's never not fun when it's put in a game. Like a Hat in Time. Neutral also gets a unique mini-boss against a chef robot that attacks differently depending on what you choose. That was pretty funny. Judging by my music folder, Undertale Yellow actually has 32 more tracks than Undertale. And personally, I listen to it a lot more often than the Undertale OST, so I think that's a good sign. I think it's because Undertale Yellow takes a lot more risks with its soundtrack, and the 3 main composers result in each track having a more unique identity compositionally. Dialamal being a standout example of this. It doesn't replicate Toby Fox's distinct style outside of the competent use of leitmotifs and excessive reverb, but honestly, I don't care. I'm sick of seeing Toby Fox in literally fucking everything. This sounds better. It's also made very apparent here how the color palettes shift on the sprites to better fit the lighting. This was done via them actually putting in the time to make a fucking shader. Seriously, if this was Undertale, it would have just been an entirely different sprite sheet. Turns out the giant busted open box was foreshadowing, and now you're being hunted down by a real killer robot. Arceus is, dare I say, quite funny, and I greatly prefer him over Mettaton, but that may just be because his character isn't as prone to being molested by the internet. But I like to believe it's more so because there are a lot of creative segments where he's actually animated and not just flatly facing the screen. I will concede that sometimes it feels like his writing is trying too hard to be funny, in a way that stands out from the rest of the game's writing, but it never gets unbearably forced for me. His theme isn't given much of an emphasis as Mettaton's, who used it in 3 different battles, but I actually really like it. It isn't just chiptune. There are a lot of unique electronic sounds used, combined with a swinging rhythm to make a song that feels like the empowering march of a one-robot army, fitting for his ego. Because he's an actual robot and not just He's able to cash in on robot humor. His deadpan, literal dialogue, lack of exclamation points, and use of loopholes to fight you are all pretty iconic. But when you're deemed a real threat during the genocide route, his empathy is bypassed and you get to see a side of him that's far more serious, desperate, and strangely sympathetic. It's a really clever way of keeping his character fresh. During the pacifist route, you're chased by Arceus, but during the genocide route, you chase him. A similar thing is done with him either handing you a trash can lid or using it himself as defense. It creates an odd sort of setup and payoff that gives each route a far more unique identity compared to Undertale. I really like his backstory and how it's mainly told through Chujin's old logs and messages. Learning Chujin's struggles to make a robot to save monster kind and how it affects the king is really interesting. It expands on Asgore's serious side and develops the time between Totally Not Uboa and Alphys, even if it's not canon. It's tragic how he manages to achieve everything he set out to do just for it to not matter anymore. Also, he dies. Imagine if this was instead told to the player via a flashback right before his boss fight with sad music. This all works to create a memorable character that's morally questionable and could be considered acting in a sense of justice similarly to Clover. I'm talking about Chujin, not Arceus. Arceus doesn't have a sense of justice, he's just kind of crazy. I think Chujin's design is way too generic for a man willing to die for his research, though. He's literally just a furry with glasses. The underlying character, however, is still pretty solid. During the genocide route, you defeat him with the power of your gamer rage, revealing that he killed the Soul of Integrity in Waterfall. It uses the level of violence terminology literally, marking when Clover really wants to kill everyone, instead of it just being levels under a different name. Recontextualizing integrity as a child that caused a massacre is unironically genius and one of the greatest interpretations I've seen. It builds off of the ballet shoe's unusually massive spike in attack power to create a character that sent the entire underground into a frenzy. It's brutal, I love it. It also makes your choice to do a genocide run feel less out of place, something desperately needed, and you get to feel the impact of it all through a third of the main cast.
I mean, the only N-word that we drop on a daily basis at my house is fucking.
In the Wild East, Soroba starts out as a common straight man compared to Starlo, but when you enter the Steamworks, she becomes a lot more irritable. I'm like 99% sure that's an intentional characterization and not an inconsistency stemming from the game's development. It would make sense she's on edge due to her being in her dead husband's workplace. I really commend the choice to give Soroba a convenient gameplay purpose instead of just having her tag along as dead weight for the sake of the narrative. She casts you a shield during combat that blocks a single hit of damage. It serves as a bit of a reward for doing the pacifist run, and even works to smooth out the difficulty caused by your lower HP. Having her play a pivotal role in puzzles needed to progress also functions as a way to make you at least somewhat care about her. She offers a distinct and welcome perspective from all of the other characters, as she holds resentment towards Asgore and his judgment for how it impacted her husband's work. Her telling you about how she'd have a competition with her daughter to say who loves each other most before bed, or talking about how Clover and Kaneko would have gotten along is melancholic but wholesome. I think it's done well, ignoring the plot twist later in the game. I love this place. White overgrown plants strike a contradictory blend of beautiful, calming, and unnerving. It's a great aesthetic, with a song encapsulating it all too well. This fight is really damn cool. Not the bullet patterns, though. They're horrible. Well, there's actually a couple fun ones. It's what happens in the battle that's so memorable and interesting. The vines add extra tension to the start of the battle. I love these kinds of meta mechanics that mess with the game's mechanics, at least when they're done diegetically. It's not something you see all that often. Kingdom Hearts is a mess, but it actually utilizes this concept really well. It adds some extra thought and commitment to the start of battle. Do you go for the item command first? Yeah, but you could go for the fight command. The setup with you trampling her flowers, the purple vines swaying in the background trying to lower her offense level, and the bot she calls for help with some admittedly entertaining attacks. This game excels at its presentation, which is funny because Undertale kind of sucked at it, purposefully but still. The music is probably an acquired taste, but personally it's one of my favorites. The more serious and desperate tone parallels you hacking away at the vines. The trumpet-like synths, powerful drums, metal clanking, electric whirring, and it generally generally just going hard is a good niche. In the game itself, though, it's one of the few songs ruined by its compression. The song becomes so muddled to the point it sounds like a completely different track, losing all of the smaller details. At this point, I'm starting to believe it might actually just be an earlier version of the song. A lot of the songs in the game are compressed to the point where you can hear a lot of artifacting. I think a lot of games are completely unoptimized and way too big just because most people can handle it. But compressing the music like this is such a half-assed solution. There's 121 megabytes of music, but there's 101 megabytes of uncompressed wave sound effects. Undertale and Deltarune did the same thing, although Deltarune is much worse in this regard because it had the retarded idea of duplicating them across 4 files instead of just having one. Look, if Phantom Hourglass for the DS can cram every single one of its 688 sound effects into 13 megabytes, you can too. Refusing to do so, or even worse, applauding the lack of effort, is just brazenly showcasing your hatred for the medium. Doing the absolute bare minimum to make something playable without the extra effort to make it truly an incredible final product. In the case of Undertale Yellow, though, a free fan game, it feels more like an amateur mistake caused by their main inspiration being a poor example rather than malicious apathy. The simple solution here is to just make them 8-bit. It halves the file size of them, with the only caveat being a bit of noise in the background. Either that, or you can just reduce the sample rate. Also, 15 megabytes of those 101 are taken up by a dot-wave version of Retribution for some reason. I know it's a good song, but geez. I don't think it's actually used. I don't know why there are 2 copies of Trial by Furry for the higher-pitched version either, when you can increase the pitch in Game Maker. Despite all of this, the game is still only the size of a single Deltarune chapter. Now that's funny. Anyway, that's what I like about The Gardener. It just hits all of my favorite niches and creates Fena perfection. I really like this boss battle, especially how it starts with him abusing a loophole to engage it. His bullet patterns aren't the most polished, but are undeniably unique and fun, making very clever use of the lid shield, requiring some surprisingly strict timing that's tense and satisfying. My only issue is how little stakes there are to reflecting his tick ball. Missing it lets you try again immediately without any form of punishment. It feels like an admittedly far less in-depth take on the Mad Dummy. The Mad Dummy is what I'd personally consider one of Undertale's best bosses for how it alters the way you interact with bullets, adding an extra layer of depth, forcing you to also consider how you'll impact their trajectory. But that worked because the punishment for messing up was having to dodge more difficult attacks. Guns Blazing is what I like to call unfathomably fucking good. Death by Glamour was a great song in Undertale, but it has been completely blown the fuck out by this one. The use of stereo sound in the boss theme makes it stand out, giving it a sort of artificial electronic sound that's obviously fitting. I recognize the Kraken sound font, I'm cultured. And it ends with a sample that sounds like a synthesized robot humming. That's also obviously fitting and goes unfathomably hard. The Genocide version is just alright. Starting at 22 seconds in, it starts sounding way too heroic. Not sure if that's meant to be for your sense of justice or Axis, but it doesn't really fit either of them. I like how it starts with a bit crushed filter. I like bit crushed instruments. They add a texture to samples that's impossible to replicate, exemplified through almost every Game Boy Advance OST. Truly a lost art. I like the end of it with what sounds like robots whispering. It could be interpreted as the robots Axis helped hide, though it's probably just the sound of the Steamworks. The way it mixes Axis's theme with the enemy retreating motif at the end was executed very well. It doesn't overtake the melody, but rather shows up like an ominous SOS signal. So it's pretty neat, but I don't listen to it as often as the original. I also appreciate how the pacifist and neutral routes have you subdue him in different ways. It really helps differentiate the two routes more than Undertale, which I think is important narratively, due to one having slight murder and the other having no murder. During the pacifist route, you give him a robot girlfriend with, and I'm quoting him here, nice curves. Wow, great job, Clover. You really have an eye for beauty. There's a lot of discussion that goes into every facet of how dumb her plan is, or how it might actually be sort of understandable. It's certainly vague enough to be interpreted either way, which is part of the issue. But of how baffled I was the first time I fought Soroba during the pacifist route is anything to go by, I think, yeah, it kinda sucks. First of all, I'm a massive fan of the song Nothing But the Truth that plays during the revelation of Chujin's tapes. It sounds very ominous, accentuated by the great presentation of the staticky TV, even though I find the Norfair sample very distracting. Undertale just faded to black when it played its tapes. Soroba is completely delusional. She cared more about her dead husband's legacy than her living daughter. She accidentally kills Kaneko in the experiment even though her husband specifically stated for her to do literally anything but that. She wants to kill Clover and use his soul to finish her husband's work, still using her daughter for the experiment even after she's fallen down. But after that, she has absolutely no plan. She doesn't know how to get into the lab, and she doesn't even know if it'll be successful. This isn't actually a bad setup for a villain, but the game repeatedly insists she's redeemable and doing it out of a mother's love, and that she's just lost and confused. At best, it's an extreme case of the sunken cost fallacy, her left in a state of disarray from her husband and daughter's death. At worst, it's bad writing. Even if she's completely successful and manages to make normal monsters into boss monsters, assuming this was the only step and easily repeatable, what does she do after that? Does she tell Asgore and admit to doing all of these dangerous tests on a human soul without his permission? If that's meant to be an intentional flaw with her plan and character, well, it's completely swept under the rug by the end of the game. If they had at least set up that she had spent years trying to find a willing host to no avail, she'd still be really stupid, but there would at least be an understandable explanation for using Kaneko in the experiment. But that didn't even happen. She did it immediately. Originally, she was written to be a straight-up villain, only caring about finishing her husband's work. But the team didn't like it, and in order to emphasize the theme of justice, they tried to rewrite her to make her more nuanced. I think this is where a lot of the narrative confusion comes from. They took a story built around an unredeemable evil monster and tried to rework it into being about a loving mother. Maybe they made more changes than I'm aware of, but that's what it feels like. Typically, I'd say it would have been better if they had stuck to making her purely a villain, but writing her to be a more morally complicated character is sort of a no-brainer for the soul of justice. It just so happens that instead of the discussion being about whether or not she can be forgiven for her actions, it's about whether or not she's retarded. Having the game's climax take place in Hotland Resort was probably an obvious but still genius decision. You spend the entire game off the beaten path and conclude by finally merging paths with the base game. It's hard to express just how great it felt the first time, entering the elevator, hearing another medium slowly fading in, and stepping out into a place I recognized all too well as the end. I really like the remix. I could go into detail on why, but really it's just because it being called Medium is just incredibly funny. When you enter this place, you're given the mind-shattering revelation that, wait, Mettaton doesn't exist yet. Yes! The statue isn't spitting on the ground, and Burger Pants hasn't had his hopes and dreams crushed yet. The new shopkeeper that replaces him isn't all that interesting or funny, though. Though, to be fair, it is hard to surpass the humor of a minimum wage employee that wants to kill himself. Flowey comments on how many times you've died, which is a morbidly in-character scorecard that I'm a huge fan of. It adds an extra bit of replay value to a game already built around being as replayable as possible. It felt great getting to him in Hotland without dying a single time to see what he'd say about it. It reminded me of how I felt playing Undertale for the first time, looking for secret dialogue that did not exist. You even get to finally use the elevator. It's very fulfilling. Also, the goop guy is still young and isn't cleaning up his own goop. It is a nice attention to detail. Flock Together sounds more like a one-shot song to me. Maybe it's the grandiose feel of it, or possibly the excessive reverb. That's not really a complaint though, it does sound nice. This is how you design a city to feel big and expansive while still keeping its design restrained. There aren't many NPCs you can talk to or buildings you can enter because it's nighttime. However, despite that, it still feels incredibly vast. with diegetic roadblocks that aren't just repurposed, unused assets. So despite objectively having next to no content, it still feels enormous and lived in, sparking your imagination similarly to what Undertale was able to achieve with some of its set pieces. It's not a string of tight, uninhabitable corridors. There's a lot of real, impressively drawn architecture on display here. Would I have loved to see more? Perhaps entering the courthouse or apartment buildings? Of course, that would have been incredible. But if they weren't going to bother adding that stuff for a small endgame area and not the core of the entire experience, then this is the best case scenario. It looks very pretty as well, a sepia-toned city illuminated by street lamps. It's a great color scheme, far better than the flat gray version of Wet Dry World shown in Undertale. Also, hey look, an ice cream stand. Kaneko's motif is a subtle theme in its original song, but it gets remixed into a really strong boss theme, which is quite strange. Well, I really like the set piece, the view over the city and the leaves falling off the tree. Soroba's exposition before her fight is unnaturally long and refined for someone who just knocked 2 of her friends unconscious and is about to kill a child.
Thanks for the newsflash, asshole!
At least when Martlet does it, it's an established part of her character that she talks a lot. It's also distracting how her overworld sprite has her eyes covered, but her face sprite remains the same. You're also unable to directly deal damage to her during this fight, something that makes no sense as you still have the option to kill her at the end. It's not like they would have had to implement an entirely new ending. At least acting serves a gameplay purpose during this boss, something that most other bosses unfortunately don't do. Unfortunately, what happens is so absurdly anime that it's hard to take seriously. I have no idea why the mask she wears grants her so much power, but personally I'm just grateful there's a reason supplied for it at all. In comparison, Martlet injecting herself with the serum in the genocide route is far better built up to and a climax to one of the game's plot points set up in Pacifist. What would have happened if the injection of the blue soul wasn't administered by a retard? The music here has a wide variety of emotions, and it's sort of an emotional journey in itself. And well, I really like it. It starts out pretty tense and crazed in Phase 1. Phase 2 is a somewhat calm build-up with a depressing segment in the middle before building back up at the end. Before the climax in Phase 3 twisting the change of plans motif, which doesn't really make sense since she's doubling down, but it still sounds good. It's far more dynamic than Hopes and Dreams, and while it took a while to grow on me, I think it far surpasses it in quality. I think the only song Toby Fox has ever made that matches its sheer emotional range is Penumbra Phantasm. Much like Undertale, Undertale Yellow leaves some unused songs in the music folder for you to listen to, something I really appreciate as a bonus for people who enjoyed the game's music. I actually prefer the earlier rendition of A Mother's Love in the game's files in some ways, though, even if the audio mixing isn't as refined. I remember finding it after beating the game and being like, holy shit. I enjoy the harpsichord a lot, and the more depressing guitar chords unlike the finished version. It provides a unique, sad take on the song, and I don't know if I actually like it more than the finished version or not. Either way, I'm glad they left it in the game files, be it intentionally or not. The gun soul feels far worse than it did in Undertale, which is strangely one of the few gameplay changes they made. It's odd, as being as close to Undertale as possible was something they were very careful about preserving, as mentioned in the art book. The yellow soul in Undertale had the tried and true mechanic where you can only have a single bullet on screen at once, rewarding precision by letting you shoot sooner if your shots landed. Basic game design rewarding playing well with momentum that can be carried over into even more skilled plays. In Undertale Yellow, there's just a delay for shooting, and it's fine, but it feels far less responsive and lacks the positive feedback for shooting well. It was probably done as an easier way to balance damage to health bars, which wasn't a mechanic in Undertale. They also changed the sprite for the bullets you shoot, giving them shading. It looks incredibly out of place in the battle's art style. They also implemented a charged shot. I'm not sure if it was always going to be in the game as an evolution of Undertale's Yellow Soul, or if it was added after Deltarune similarly to the run button. Either way, it doesn't really feel that great to use. Credit to Deltarune, it did a good job with both the visual and auditorial design of the charged bullets. They're incredibly quick and intuitive to shoot, even when you're not staring directly at the soul. In comparison, Undertale Yellow's charged shots feel more sluggish. The visual cue is too slow and compact to be useful, and the audio doesn't line up with the animation as well either. The shooting mechanic is already a good bit to get used to only for the final boss, and yet for some reason they also introduced a dash ability with invincibility frames. It's very lenient and it's very spammable, and it's also taught very poorly. Outside of the very beginning, where it pauses the game to tell you to use it, you're never forced to use it again outside of an occasional attack that's outright impossible to dodge without it. Most bullet patterns aren't specifically designed in a way where using it provides much of an advantage over dodging normally either. The entire fight is a total mess of spectacle, but then Hopes and Dreams kicks in, and even in my dumbfounded state, I think to myself, alright, that's pretty good. The ending with everyone gathering around in memorial of Clover is a bit cheesy with the music and everyone, even including Dalv, coming together to send your hat down a raft and mourn the loss of you, but oh, it's cute. They send your hat and gun down a river and waterfall, explaining how it ended up in the hands of Caddy and Bratty. The screen fades out and a song begins to fade in, because in an incredible bit of continuity, Clover is woken up by your call for help in Undertale. It's so incredibly well done. And you get a really nice painting of his hat resting in a bed of flower petals. It's good. It's hard not to feel at least something for Clover, if no one else, after playing as him the entire game. Anyone with a modicum of knowledge on storytelling can predict what ending something will have from the start, but that doesn't mean they'll lack emotional impact. Perfect endings are boring, they're hollow, make the world feel fake, and don't leave any intrigue, but at least they make the time you spent worthwhile. Bad endings are just horrible. They make everything you've experienced a complete waste of time and effort. Bittersweet endings like this one are the best. They leave you with something to think about. A bit of sadness for what was lost, all while still wrapping up the narrative in a fulfilling way. Obviously, there's a lot of nuance, but I'm trying to be general here. I respect Undertale Yellow a lot for having a more bittersweet ending, and a final boss that's far more grounded than Undertale's in terms of motivation and power scaling, as well as trying to be more mature and nuanced in its themes. The boss theme representing this well with its far more complicated mix of emotions. Well, that was neat. If I were to speak from an unbiased narrative perspective, I prefer the ending where you choose to kill Soroba instead. It more naturally builds off of the idea of a morally questionable final boss, where you decide whether or not it's justified to kill them for what they've done. Encapsulating my point that you get to choose what kind of justice Clover is looking for. Starlo is also given some absolutely incredible dialogue, wondering what justice even means anymore and commenting on the wind blowing her dust away like she never even existed. His final line stating how he should have shot that last bullet being an incredible callback to the end of his boss fight that cuts deep. But Martlet is a bit too sterile and nonchalant about the whole ordeal. After all, we did just kill her dead best friend's wife. The final battle with Asgore also finally pays off what Flowey has been preparing you for the entire game, but unfortunately it's not a full-fledged boss fight, it's just a loop of attacks that repeat until you die. I understand why, as making an entire fight for Asgore with an ending where you defeat him would sort of write the game into a corner, and require even more development time on a game I'm sure they were already sick of by the end. They revealed a removed scene in the art book that I'm absolutely devastated was changed. Originally, Martlet was going to struggle against Asgore because she didn't want you to die. Something I'm disappointed was removed because it would have been such a brutal conclusion for her character. Throughout the game, she's constantly dragged away, never able to help Clover, and at the end, when it matters most, she's once again unable to do anything. It's still sort of present in the final scene, it's just not as striking as it could have been. However, this scene was cut because they didn't want to show Asgore being too cruel. But that's what I love so much about Asgore. He's a big softy at heart, driven to violence with his iron will for the good of his people. It was why he obliterated the mercy button in Undertale, not only for you, but for himself. He was basically the perfect narrative parallel of a father, until he was mocked and belittled at the end of the pacifist route. I love how decisive Clover is about his fate, though. During the genocide route, one of the most iconic songs in the entire soundtrack plays. I played this game when it was still a demo, so I liked this song before it was cool. But enemies die so quickly that you'll hardly hear it, and it slows down each time, so you'll sadly progressively hear even less. The way it's mixed into a ton of the genocide themes sounds really good though. Undertale Yellow implements a mechanic that limits the amount of monsters you can encounter in a room, forcing you to progress. It stops the player from boring themselves by walking around in the same room for 20 minutes, by forcing them to play the game at least a tiny bit. Though it does introduce the issue of it not being clear what rooms have enemy encounters now that you have to search for them all. Undertale asked for your name at the start of the game, but characters never referred to you by it outside of Flowey. That was a massive missed opportunity, as the characters referring to you by your name immediately creates a more personal relationship that could have been used to really great effect. Undertale Yellow, on the other hand, doesn't let you name Clover due to him being his own character. This is not bad. In fact, it really doesn't change anything. What does change is that the writing of Undertale Yellow actually has the characters call him by his name. It works to give the characters a far more natural and believable relationship with them, but primarily creates a far more engaging contrast when their attitude towards you shifts during the genocide route. At the end of the pacifist route, they thank Clover for all he's done, but then you do the genocide route and they refer to Clover with such disdain. When they talk about you and your actions, they don't just say, "You won't get away with this," they say, "You won't get away with this, Clover." It gives the dialogue much more weight than it otherwise would because it's directly calling out the character. While you're on the genocide route, Clover's eyes are hidden by the shade of his hat. Most people probably think this is edgy and gay, but I have the taste of a teenager in the 2000s, so I think it looks cool. Hiding a character's eyes like this is an incredible design choice for multiple reasons. In Undertale Yellow's case, it allows you to far more easily project what you believe Clover is thinking onto him. Anger, irritation, impatience, absolutely everything. Outside of Undertale Yellow, though, it also forces artists to be far more creative and skilled with how they portray an expression. Eyes are a simple way of conveying how someone feels. It requires an insane amount of skill to get the same feeling across without them. An insane amount of skill that's immediately recognizable and satisfying to look at, far more than a normal expression would be. The same can go for hiding a mouth as well. It's still a cool fight that shows off the scrappier side of Soroba. Jesus, didn't she have enough already? What the fuck is this? Personally, I'm grateful the damage values are low. It helps make the level ups in the game feel like you're actually getting stronger and not just a cosmetic change. Though, much like in Undertale, it's taken too far during regular battles, and normal enemies only deal 1 or 2 damage. It causes regular combat encounters to be boring. People complained about grinding being boring in the genocide route, and people gave the really dumb excuse that it was intentionally bad. But really the issue is that the lack of damage removed the stakes and skill expression of random encounters. There's a big issue here, the lack of sufficient telegraphs or predictability. The first attack in Sans' fight is ironically a great example of telegraphs, and that's really funny. The reason it catches everyone off guard is because it's Sans and a relatively difficult attack. The Gaster Blasters work as a telegraph showing where the lasers will come from, lasting a shockingly long amount of time before firing, giving you ample reaction time. It's also his very first attack, meaning if you die, you only lose about 10 to 20 seconds. In Soroba's battle, the lasers appear out of absolutely nowhere, and as if that isn't bad enough, they appear really fucking fast. And this attack appears at random throughout the entire battle, with nothing signifying it's the attack where it's going to happen. It's not like all of the bullet patterns are bad though. All of the attacks with the flowers are very simple and fun to weave through. But that's mainly due to them, unlike the rest of the attacks, actually being predictable and hence reactable. A lot of the attacks feel like they were made to look cool first, like, oh, we should have an attack where she breaks pillars and flowers come out and explode. And then they implemented it and it really sucked. Attacks reducing your maximum HP is a mechanic I don't really have an issue with. You should be punished for getting hit in a video game. But then it started reducing my HP for touching the walls of the bullet board, and that's when I thought it was bullshit. The boundary box should not be an obstacle. It's a tool used to keep the player in the bounds of the attack. It is absolutely possible to make a bunch of creative scenarios where avoiding the edges of the box is part of an attack, but just making the walls damage you in addition to a normal bullet pattern is not all that fun or interesting. It doesn't introduce much if not any difficulty. It's mainly just inconvenient to have to let go of the arrow keys before you reach the edge. Also, there's no in-game reason she should be able to reduce your maximum HP. She couldn't do it in the pacifist route, and we only ever get to see her staff produce fire and barriers. I admittedly don't really like the start to Trial by Furry. The Japanese-ness is just too much to handle. But beyond that point, around the 23-second mark, it actually sounds really good. It does a good job encapsulating the sound of a scrappy but desperate showdown. The Japanese-ness eventually ends up working to its advantage with the instrumentation, preventing it from falling into the trap of just using metal guitars, and giving it a really unique sound that I'm incredibly fond of. That's a dulcimer, right? That's a cool instrument. It sounds good here. Finally, her long-winded spiel at the end is also trying too hard, and her ending it by telling you to go to hell is hard to take seriously. I adore the more antagonistic relationship that forms between Flowey and Clover, turning their previously wholesome companionship into two guys that just really fucking hate each other, but have to cooperate to get what they want. It's morbidly funny, similarly to Frisk walking all over Papyrus's puzzles to his dissatisfaction. Or Burger Pants' absolutely iconic line of, "I can't go to hell, I'm all out of vacation days."
Oh my god, is that blackface?
Oh my god! Remedy is very different from Megalovania. It's more generic, but not necessarily in a bad way. Even though I'm sick of Megalovania after hearing it so much, I still, sadly, think it's the better song. Remedy is still an appropriate song for Martlet. It's empowering, fitting her reaching her true potential as a royal guard, and of course, sounds incredibly good. And much like many other final boss themes, I prefer it over the Phase 2 variant. However, it lacks the atypical music choices, such as the jazzy scale that made Megalovania into a phenomenon. The Phase 2 theme isn't as strong or memorable, but I still respect it for being an empowering climax to the enemy retreating motif. Obviously, the presentation here is astounding for a fan project. The blue hue that takes over the entire battle menu, the spectral wings, and the full screen attacks where she dive bombs you. I absolutely see the vision with it, and I don't have a problem with the final boss being difficult. In fact, Undyne and Sans were a bit easy for my tastes, but this was unfortunately just executed really badly. There's far too much visual clutter, either from the charged beam covering the entire screen, talons covering you, or feathers leaving after images for no reason. The boxes you're meant to shoot or dash through appear way too fast. I don't know why they put in the extra effort to make them fade in, when it would have been better if you could just see them coming from the start, to give the player more time to plan out their execution. During the fight, you're basically rewarded for just spamming the dash move, which, once again, still isn't taught well. Except, unlike Soroba's boss fight in the pacifist route, almost every attack she has forces you to use it in a precise way. The art book reveals the difficulty and attack patterns were inspired by
Melania, Blade of Mikola.
in Elden Ring, but the
Melania, Blade of Mikola.
Fight in Elden Ring didn't introduce dodge rolls and ranged attacks as a new exclusive mechanic. I guarantee you the clarity, lack of input lag, and precision of 60 FPS would have helped immensely here, something that their inspiration Elden Ring had. But that's an artistic liberty they unfortunately didn't take with this game. I really don't have as much to say about this boss fight as I'd like to. The presentation is incredible, the bullet patterns are fucking awful, and I wish it was Starlo instead. The Photoshop Flowey fight in Undertale is a solid example of achieving a lot with a little. The human souls are not fleshed out or defined characters in the slightest. However, immediately there's the incentive to care about them and help them because they're murdered children who are thrust into the exact same situation as you. And it's immediately understandable why they would want to help you in return, as obviously they'd want to break free from Flowey's control. So when you reach out to all of them and they come together to help you as the music swells and it ends with Flowey's defense dropping to 0, it's a powerful moment. There isn't any dialogue or even animation, it's all conveyed through music and gameplay, like a video game should convey. The only issue is, as someone who grew up with Earthbound, Photoshop Flowey isn't scary, like at all. His dialogue isn't scary, his design isn't scary, his music isn't scary, and his attacks aren't scary. But what if he was scary? Okay, it's still not all that scary, but compared to Undertale, a real attempt was made, and I love it with every fiber of my being. Neutral doesn't have an ending monologue like Undertale, but that makes sense since you're dead. However, it's more than made up for by Flowey using everyone you've killed in the first phase of his boss battle, giving your choices a far more creative impact and a twisted sort of revenge for the characters. I really like the mutilated designs of everyone you killed to make them more unsettling, and it isn't done haphazardly. Delve's eyes are very small and unintimidating. During the Flowey fight, they're not that. There's a cut martlet sprite for the Flowey segment. I don't know why it wasn't implemented because it looks really good. The Feisty 5 sprite for this segment could have been the best example of pixel art in the entire game if it wasn't for the fact it was never used. A massive shame they didn't find an excuse to implement it because it's so disturbingly good. Those are only half of the battle though. The other attacks are by the titular Flower himself, all drawn with varying art styles of varying eeriness. It's not often in Undertale or its fan games that the presentation is used to such an incredible extent as this. It's also proof of how much indie games have lost by choosing to lazily stick to low-resolution pixel art. My favorite style on display here is the petal one, his stitched mouth slowly spreading to a wide smile and his petals getting torn off on each end by a disembodied hand. I don't like that one though, it looks like hell of a boss. It takes advantage of what Undertale's abstract presentation during battles can be used for. The attack that smoothly blends into the chase segments with hundreds of hands rising from the bottom of the screen is visual perfection. It reminds me of how great the Manos boss fight was in the original Ribbit. The chase segments here are also surprisingly difficult compared to Undertale, mainly due to how big the hitboxes are, and the tighter hallways you're forced to navigate on the fly. The fact you visit segments that aren't even experienced by Clover in-game is also a great example of story told via gameplay. It's an incredibly unique take on his boss battle that explores the mechanics of human and monster souls. I have 3 minor issues with this segment though. One of them is merely a missed opportunity, and another is an issue with modern games in general. First, the intro and its music starts with the regular Flowey theme before distorting into something filled with dread. Every time I see this play out, I expect something to happen, some kind of subversion of expectations, but instead they fly off screen and you're just left waiting as the music builds up. Instead, they should have done something with the friendliness pellets to make them more difficult to dodge than you'd expect. I'm glad the half a year I spent in Game Maker 2 at least amounted to something. Second is just that this isn't how glitches actually look, ever. This is a common issue I have. Pretend glitches in games that are so cartoonishly fantastical and unrealistic that they're completely unrecognizable from their inspiration. It's unfortunate because glitches are actually a very cool anomaly, and people all insist on turning them into these retarded fantasy elements. Just have the text deteriorate into a bunch of broken sprites instead. Undertale Yellow isn't anywhere close to the worst example of this, but it's still disappointing it didn't go the full mile by authentically replicating the look. I don't know if this is just a result of people only making games in Unreal Engine, Unity, and GameMaker, or what. 3. There's a chance the act menu has an option to heal you, and it makes the segment too easy if you know about it. That's it. Those are my only real complaints, and they're all only for the first phase of the battle. The chase segments serve as more than just a cool looking attack, as it filters you into the next area as different places flicker in and out. This visual has stuck with me since I first saw it. The dusty sprites, the way it warps around Clover, and the hundreds of flowers piling up in the background. A song that sounds like his unanswered calls for help. It's pretty awesome. Ending with a really startling shattering effect done with code, something I'm sure makes Deltarune fans very angry. And then, abruptly, you're sent back to the best area in the entire game. I love the remix, the static, the way it wobbles in and out. I don't know how they did it, but I like it. I wish this segment was more than just a short walk, perhaps an entire puzzle-focused area similarly to an old point-and-click adventure game in order to get Martlet's boat working. I know that would have taken a lot of time, but the setting feels underutilized, and I would have loved to see more in the style. Although I equally appreciate how quickly it gets to the point, just like I'm about to. It's perfect. It's literally just perfect. The hand-drawn animation, the frantic music and phase shifts, the attacks, how he grabs you and makes you shoot differently styled petals to fight different versions of himself. It's all epic. His eyes following your soul is also such a small but incredible detail. You get the invincible dash here, which feels more like an oversight than a conscious addition due to the lack of a tutorial like the other routes, but I ironically think it implements it the most naturally. The dash is incredibly useful for a lot of the attacks, despite not being made mandatory at any point, probably aided by all of the extra screen space. Attacks like the hands and spinning smile, while possible without it, are made far easier with skilled use of it. My favorite specimen is the paper one, because the style is the most effective blend of creative and creepy. Visually, it's the most grounded in reality, but not in the typical gory way. The music also uses the Plock sound font for the laugh. I'm very cultured. The polygonal one is probably the best in terms of attack variety and style, as well as being the best balanced with 2 short phases. One where you knock off his front petals, and one where you shoot at his newly revealed skull. I recognize the Forest Temple sample. I'm very cultured. The mechanical specimen has the Hollow Knight art style instead of a more realistic one, but it still looks pretty awesome. It has my favorite song for the specimens, an incredibly ominous track that sounds like the agonizing screams of machinery. It just sucks you probably won't be fighting it long enough to hear the climax. The clay specimen does a great job replicating the art style, while having a song that undoubtedly goes the hardest. If I had to guess, it's probably the fan favorite. I really enjoyed the behind-the-scenes look at how it was done in the art book. The organic specimen is just sort of okay. I'm glad they didn't go with the idea of a cute design because, well, it would have been completely out of place tonally, but I still think the art style of the final one is sort of plain. Undoubtedly a great concept, though, and the music including the sound of a heart monitor was a smart choice. The patchwork specimen looks very impressive, even though it comes at the cost of the readability of the attacks. I love the ending with Flowey getting mad at your persistence, before slowly gazing up at you with his pupils slightly shrinking. It's sort of subtle. It wordlessly tells you exactly what he's thinking, and I like it a lot. My only issue here is that the balance of the different Flowey forms is very uneven, which really only sucks because I wish some of them took longer to defeat due to them being so fun to look at and fight. There also isn't any real punishment or a loss of progress if you die, which is odd. It's an incredible final boss. This took 6 months of development, and I can see why. I'm not a fan of when developers waste time on stupid bullshit, but in this case, it wasn't stupid bullshit. It was 100% worth every second. 6 months doesn't even feel like that much time for all of this. The different art styles are just that cool to see. It looks cool. It was a team effort and a lot of people drew concept art that was luckily shared in the art book, which I really recommend checking out if you're interested. Great use of color, incredible perspective, lighting, and framing, mainly framing. The Axis one being a great example. I like this one especially because I suck at drawing clothes, and the angular way the bandana wraps around Clover gives it a great sense of depth. The trims of his jeans also being a good example. They're also occasionally very shitposty, which I wholeheartedly respect, as I too am just a shitposter at heart. Undertale Yellow had one singular acknowledgement from Toby Fox after its 7 years of development and eventual release. Damage control after one of his copyright managers took down the game's entirely original OST for infringement. This never should have happened to begin with. The fact it did, and someone like this was hired in the first place, should be a damning condemnation of everyone's character. The way people responded to this was downright appalling, unsurprisingly making it about themselves and refusing to aim their ire towards those who deserved it the most. Instead of focusing on the developers of Undertale Yellow and how their 7-year-long passion project was revoked from its rightful place as a work of art on par with any other original game, they had to make it about themselves.
And the entire 6 hours was completely not able to be monetized. This obviously made me upset, but...
The solution shouldn't have been the comically vague gesture of giving money to charity. It should have been acknowledging Undertale Yellow as a video game. If Toby cared as much as he said he does, he'd hire a team to port it to console, give a nod to it in Deltarune, or get Fangamer to release some merchandise of the characters. Don't do the laziest, simplest gesture of benevolence just so you can move on from the tedium of it all. The game obviously wasn't owed any acknowledgement, but going on a long spiel in the anniversary playthrough of Undertale about how much more fan interpretation and theories mean to you than your own writing doesn't only ring hollow, but is a blatant fucking insult and lie, knowing how they were treated the one time they were actually forced to be acknowledged.
Maybe you guys feel only my answer to these questions counts or matters. But to me I only feel the opposite. This is just one interpretation. The underground is as big as you want it to be.
What a fucking disgusting mess. It's very interesting to analyze a game made by a passionate group of composers and artists that all came together to make something they were truly passionate about. I care a lot about this game, enough to make this whole video on it, and unlike my other videos, it's not out of a feeling of betrayal, but rather just because I like it. I really cannot overstate how important it is that it's a free fan project that was developed for 7 years. That's an insane amount of time to continue to dedicate to something like this. Personally, I would have given up on it. I was probably a bit overcritical near the end, or maybe some people think I wasn't critical enough. Not sure I'm all that interested in what they'll make next though, because the person who made Palm Gets Wi-Fi started making some weird shit after their masterpiece. What I've realized by the end is that Undertale had a bunch of the same flaws as Undertale Yellow, they're just far more understated. The excessive amount of furry characters that are out of place in the narrative, the overly simple battle system and objectives in it, the arguably really annoying characters, and flawed character arcs of people you're supposed to care about but don't at all. I'm honestly inclined to believe a lot of the hatred towards the game is just projection of how people actually feel about Undertale but aren't willing to admit. They're so much more similar than you'd think, aside from the fact Undertale Yellow actually has good art direction. Undertale is not a perfect game. Its story is sort of haphazard. Stuff such as humans apparently having stronger magic than monsters, as shown in the opening cinematic, is completely glossed over. Characters like Papyrus and Sans are funny subversions of your expectations after Toriel's warning in the ruins. But the characters after them continue to build off of the exact same formula of appearing dangerous but actually being ridiculous screaming geeks that you convince to be your best friends. I have grown to really not like Undyne, Alphys, or Metaton. Asgore is the only character with a level of depth and complex morality that uses your choice to fight or spare him to powerful emotional effect. It's no wonder I love the take Chapter 1 of Deltarune had on it all. Acknowledging that there are some people you just have to fight, that not everyone is just a super quirky goofball that's really kind deep down, until they were. Fuck. Undertale Yellow wears its heart on its sleeves, which is why it's so much easier for everyone to bash and criticize. Not that I disagree or have a problem with that, I believe everything should be bashed and criticized for all of its faults, and that tone and language shouldn't matter. It's just an observation about fandoms and how they've begun to act and treat media. Undertale Yellow is not a perfect game either, but I can look past most of its issues and enjoy what's there. I like the characters, I love the music, I love the atmosphere, but most of all, I like how it treats the player like an adult that can handle more nuanced and complicated character arcs, even if their execution is a tad flawed. Soroba, before her pacifist boss fight, even acknowledges the flaws that get glossed over in the good ending to Undertale. How humans would react to them suddenly being released to roam free on the surface. It's just a couple of lines, but it shows a level of awareness and willingness to be more realistic and sincere in its tone that Undertale purposefully glossed over. Now, after all of this, does this mean if you haven't already played the game you should absolutely check it out? Probably not. If you weren't invested enough to play it 2 whole years after it released, I doubt it's your thing. Also, I just spoiled everything about it, and it's not exactly winning any awards for its groundbreaking new gameplay. If you want some suggestions for fan games I haven't entirely spoiled, then you can check out TS Underswap with its shockingly high production value. Dylan Tale is a niche fan game I really liked from when I was a kid, and has a shockingly incredible genocide route boss fight. Amityville is also a niche fan game with a fun take on 2-player co-op. It was made before there was a mod for it. Sorry this video took so long, I hope it was worth the wait though. I wish I was able to finish it faster and when it was more relevant, but at least it gave me a lot of time to think. I definitely missed out on some things I wanted to discuss, such as the run button or how bad the game could have been but didn't end up being, but this video has been worked on long enough, and I wanna die.